Welcome back to the Quantum Yoga Podcast. We're here today with Russell Targ, who's a physicist and author, and the co-founder of Stanford Research Institute investigation into psychic abilities in the 70s and the 80s. He's author of a few books, including The Reality of ESP, and has a film coming out in February of 2019 called Third Eye Spies, which documents his history into psychic abilities and the work that he's done with the governmental organizations around this. Welcome to the program, Russell. It's an honor to have you.
I'm very happy to be with you. We finally finished this film after 5 years of work. So it's very nice to be able to talk about that. And I'm always happy to talk about psychic abilities, which I've been involved with for past 40 years or more.
I would love to hear the origin story behind that as a starting point. Can we talk about this transition from laser physicist to psychic spying and this transition?
Well, the origin story is a little longer than that. My vision is very poor, but as a dividend for very poor vision, I've always been aware that psychic functioning exists. That is, even as a child, the idea of ESP and psychic abilities was self-evident to me, even though nobody was talking about it. I played cards with my mother and a neighbor, and I always knew that I could tell the card that was coming up. And when I played duplicate bridge, they'd frequently call the tournament director because they thought I was cheating, because I knew what was going to happen. So in the course of my life, I've had a number of striking psychic things that happened, but I knew that there's no way to make a living doing ESP research. I was aware that from high school days, I was aware that ESP research was going on and was a thing to do, but it was evident it was very hard to earn a living doing ESP research. So I spent 15 years doing laser research from about 1960 to 1972. And then by 1972, I told my wife, I'm ready for a career change. I'm going to give up designing and building lasers and start a program investigating psychic abilities. So I was able to go back to my customers who supported my laser work. I could go to the CIA and to NASA and tell them, I've done a lot of tough things for you in the past that have worked. I would like to now spend some time teaching people how to get in touch with psychic abilities. And I'm quite confident this is going to work because in my life, I have seen very high quality psychic functioning that I did. So I'm not here talking to you as somebody who, I'm not pushing my psychic prowess. I'm just saying that I had a lot of precognitive dreams, which I continue to have, and psychic flashes. So I felt in 1972 there was not a lot of risk. As certain as I was of lasers, I was equally certain the psychic abilities were available and probably widely available. And I was able to convince CIA and NASA that I could teach people to do that.
It may be obvious here, but what's in it for them?
Well, I convinced NASA that it would be desirable for an astronaut to be able to be in touch with his spacecraft, be able to know if something was going to break or something did break, where it would be. So I was arguing to NASA that we could help the astronauts become more clairvoyant, to be in touch with the physical world around them. And CIA, of course, is a big snooping agency. If I could tell, and I told them that we could teach people to look into the distance, look into the future, find people who are kidnapped, describe Russian stuff or Chinese stuff, just by focusing your mind on the distant place. And both of those agencies thought that that would be very advantageous. And what I brought to the table was not so much my psychic abilities, but my conviction that the stuff was real. That I could sit across from a Army colonel or a head of the CIA and man to man say, there's no risk here. I'm prepared to bet my job that I will be able to show your people how to describe distant stuff. Let's try it. And that turned out to be very successful. We were able to describe what was going on inside a NSA listening post in Virginia. And Pat Price, who's a great psychic, retired police commissioner, was able to draw a picture of this place at Sugar Grove, describe the buildings, go into one of the buildings and say, I see a row of green safes, and one of these is really hot. And in this safe, they're describing a project called 8 Ball, and all the projects have billiard names, 8 Ball, cue ball, rack up, and that's what I see. And that happened to be a current top secret program in which even the names were top secret. So CIA said, okay, I got the picture. We have things for this guy to do. And we did a number of formal experiments, because I'm a scientist after all, where my colleague Hal Puthoff would hide in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I didn't know any of the places, of course. The target locations were chosen by somebody else and locked up in a safe that none of us had a contact with. So each day I would sit with Pat Price, for example, and say, well, Hal has gone to his hiding place. Just take a deep breath. Tell me about the surprising pictures that show up in your awareness. What do you see that's interesting? And he would then describe where Puthoff was hiding. And we did 9 of those, and he got 7 out of those 9 first place matches. What that means is that if Puthoff was kidnapped 9 days in a row, Price would have found him the first place he looked in 7 out of those 9 times. And we published that in Nature magazine. And a subsequent one we published in the Proceedings of the Engineering Society, Proceedings of the IEEE. And then I found CIA said, can't you find somebody who's not a famous psychic? Can't you find an ordinary person? And I found a good friend of mine, Hella Hamid, who was a Life magazine photographer and a family friend for many years, highly intelligent, born in Germany, came to America, a professional photographer, and she just thought it would be fun to work with me, and it would be a gas to be paid money to be psychic. How cool would that be? She'd come to SRI every week and sit in a little comfortable room and tell where somebody's hiding. That sounds all right. And she turned out to be even more successful than the most psychic person we'd ever seen. So that was our clue for me and for the CIA. The psychic abilities was probably widely distributed because Hella was just this cheerful, intelligent woman, and she did what I told her to do, and it was perfect. She was extraordinary. And so, I then had 2 CIA operatives come, and they did very well. They came to look at our protocol, make sure there's no sensory leakage, and I showed them how to do remote viewing, which they did excellently. And in the film, I show remote viewing of the CIA agents. Our contract monitor on camera says, well, they came to you as puppies and you send them back as hunters. And they, even after our program ended, they continued to do remote viewing with the CIA. So the long answer is, you wanted to know why would they be interested? Well, we taught these people to quiet their minds and describe where people are hiding, what's going on in weapons factories, downed airplanes, hidden submarines. So we were really doing psychic spying during the Cold War. And as a physicist, I'm basically in favor of information. The CIA is not my favorite customer, of course, but as a scientist, I'm in favor of intelligence as compared with ignorance. I know there are a lot of people who prefer ignorance, but most scientists want to know what's actually happening.
This may be a good place to give a little backstory for our listeners, or just a one-on-one on defining some terms that you use frequently, like ESP, psi, clairvoyance, remote viewing. If you can perhaps give us a basic definition of these things, if they are synonyms with one another, if there are differences.
Oh, ESP, extrasensory perception, was really brought to the foreground in America by J.B. Ryan at Duke University. He had a parapsychology laboratory, or ESP laboratory, where he was looking at telepathy, which is a mind-to-mind connection. For example, if I'm sitting here and I decide that I will think of some interesting object that I don't have in front of me, I just think of an interesting object, and you then describe the image that came to you. That would be a mind-to-mind connection, mental telepathy.
Were you
On the
just
other hand,
thinking of something?
say again?
Were you just thinking of something?
Yes, I was. So that would be mental telepathy.
Mm.
Now, clairvoyance would be, I might say, I have an interesting object on my table here that exists. So you could then get that information from me because I know the answer, or by expanding your awareness and describing an interesting object on the table. The stronger ability than either of those is precognition, which is your ability to describe events or objects that will occur in the future. So I've had situations where I'm interviewing an Army guy and he says, I don't see anything. And I will say, well, the time's almost up. We're going to go there in a little while. Why don't you describe what you see when we all get out of the car at the site, wherever it is? And then he can describe that. And I got in trouble with the Army, said, you're cheating. You're looking into the future. We want you to describe what's going on right now. And I tried to explain to them that the time is a fiction. There is no time. Your nature is timeless awareness. The quiet mind can expand and reside in time. And Padmasambhava, the great Dharma master in Buddhism, the 8th century, wrote a book called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. Sounds very contemporary. And he tells you that your nature is not being made of meat and potatoes, but your nature is timeless awareness, and you can quiet your mind and see into the future, see into the distance, diagnose illness, communicate with the dead. And of course, this was all known to the Hindus 1,000 years before that. Patanjali, as you know, in the Yoga Sutras, talked about the same thing. That is, in order to communicate with God or spacious awareness, you quiet your mind, and images from the future and the distance will come to you. So that this is not New Age. This has all been known for 2,500 years and written about in great detail. The Hindus of Patanjali, which was the time of Buddha, totally understood how to do remote viewing and what kind of meditation, sanyama meditation, where you quiet your mind but stay conscious, allows you to describe the present and the future and the distance. So the 3 kinds of psychic abilities that we talk about are telepathy, which is the mind-to-mind connection, and clairvoyance. For example, at one point, the Russians crashed an airplane by accident in northern Africa, and it was full of code books, and nobody knew where it was. Pilot wasn't with the airplane because he had gone elsewhere, he had bailed out. So we're looking for a downed airplane someplace in northern Africa. There's no telepathy available because nobody knows the answer. So we got two people, one who could mark a map and the other could describe what it looked like where the plane was downed. And we and the CIA then sent a helicopter into the jungle in Zaire and found the airplane. And we had pictures of people coming out of the jungle with pieces of airplane. We show this all in our film. And Jimmy Carter gives us a testimonial for the film where he said the only thing inexplicable that happened in his presidency is that a medium in California found a downed plane that the CIA couldn't find, and aerial photography couldn't find because it was buried in the jungle. So that'd be pure clairvoyance. Nobody knew the answer. My psychic subjects, a man and a woman, were able to describe just where it was so we could send people on the ground. There's no chance of sensory leakage. And then after I left the program in 1982, I started a program called Delphi Associates, where we're using precognition to forecast changes in the silver commodity market, where the silver is going up or down, up a little, up a lot, down a little, down a lot. And we did that 9 weeks in a row successfully, made $120,000, which at that time was a lot of money. And we're on the front page of the Wall Street Journal about a company cracks the silver market. So that would be pure precognition. There's nowhere to look. Nobody knows the answer. The only place to look is in the future. So it's a long answer to your question. What are we talking about?
Yeah. Well, let's pick up around this time where you begin to train people in this ability, in this chronology that you were giving us before.
Training is really an overstatement. Since we all have this ability, but you don't really teach a person how to ride a bicycle. If you got a 10-year-old, you show them a bicycle, stand them up and give them a little push, and he'll ride off in general. That's my experience. Well, when I was ready to ride a bike, I just got on the bike and rode off. I think a lot of people do that. Psychic ability is like that. Everybody in the society is not psychic because it's forbidden. So a lot of people don't want to be thought of weird or outsiders or criticized or so forth. So in this society, people in general don't use their psychic abilities. In Brazil or in Holland or in Iceland, psychic functioning is quite ordinary. It's not even something to talk about. It's just an ability people have, and that's the way it is. In training people, it's an overstatement. I was asked to train up a group of people for the Army to create a Army Psychic Corps at Fort Meade. And out of 30 intelligence officers, Hal Putoff, my colleague, Hal Putoff and I are both laser scientists, and we started the SRI program together. We started the Stanford Research Program together. In 1978, we had already written a book, published 2 scientific papers, and we were getting money from the Army. Army intelligence said, you know, we would like to move away from the weirdos in California and teach some Army officers how to do this. So we chose 6 Army officers from the group at Fort Meade. One of those was Joe McMoneagle, who was a warrant officer. And I chose him because I interviewed all of these people and asked them about do they have any psychic experiences? What makes them want to destroy their Army career and go into an ESP program? And they would tell me stories. And Joe McMoneagle told me about being in Vietnam. And as he got off the plane, arriving in Vietnam, he said he saw another plane on the runway, big yellow plane, and then he realized that plane was not there. And from his life experience, he said, I guess I'm going to get out of here on a big yellow plane. And that was correct. 9 months later, he had been injured and he was evacuated by an Air America big banana colored plane. And he told me that story. I said, we'll start next week. And Joe said, oh, no, I've never done any remote viewing, never done anything like that. And I said, well, my colleague Hal and your colonel are hiding someplace in the Bay Area. And I'd like you to quiet your mind, describe the surprising images that come into your awareness, and make a sketch of that. And he drew a number of little images around a piece of paper. And finally I said, well, they're getting ready to come home. Which of these pictures do you like? And he said, well, let me draw a big one for you. And he drew a picture of a building that was a long, low building in front and a tall building with columns in the back. And he said, when you see this building, it'll look like piano keys, and the fountain off on the left. And that turned out to be the Stanford Art Museum, the Cantor Museum, which is exactly a long, low building in front and a Greek temple kind of building right behind it. And he made an excellent architectural drawing of that. So that was his first effort. So when you say, well, how did you teach him to do remote viewing? All right, we just sat down in a quiet room, and in accordance with the instructions from Padmasambhava 1,200 years ago, we told in order to expand your awareness, you have to avoid guessing or grabbing onto guessing, because I was trying to think of Padmasambhava's words. You want to avoid guessing and grasping. So you want to avoid what Ingo Swann was the great psychic who taught us how to do remote viewing. He's a New York artist who'd been psychic all his life. And he said, what interferes with psychic abilities is analytical overlay. That is naming and grasping, and trying to guess, and memory and imagination. All of those things are not ESP. But from an engineer's point of view, memory and imagination is like noise in the channel. So I'm not teaching people to be psychic. I'm teaching them how to improve the signal-to-noise ratio. That I have things to tell you that will definitely diminish the noise. That you want to watch out for crystal clear images and names of things. If I tell you your buddy is hiding someplace in the Bay Area, and you say, well, it looks to me like Macy's, I will know from my experience that did not sound like ESP. So I could say, well, let's take a break now. Tell me what you're experiencing that makes you think of Macy's. And you then tell me about coat hangers and wires and so forth. And I had that exact experience where somebody said, I see Macy's. The person had been hiding at the pedestrian overpass across the freeway, which is made of wires and poles. And what the fellow eventually drew were wires and poles. He thought he had a clothes rack at Macy's, but his psychic images led him to quite a detailed architectural drawing of the pedestrian overpass. So my function is not to teach ESP, but to guide people away from guessing at images and trying to get information from their memory and their imagination. The job of an interviewer is to guide people to stick with their mental images, and later on you can describe your feeling for the shape and the form and the texture to get further information, but it's all very internal, subjective feelings. Not hard to do.
Got it. And is there a method that you employ to initially quiet the mind?
Not particularly. That I'm a lifelong meditator, so I can close my eyes and quickly describe what's going on elsewhere. But I will just tell people to take a couple of deep breaths, close their eyes, remember to breathe, because people will sometimes start holding their breath if they're not a meditator, and describe what you're experiencing. And I will guide them, I will push them. I say, now I want you to just describe the surprising images that come to view. And that will keep them from guessing. And in my book, in the Reality of ESP, I have a chapter on how to work with a friend, taking turns doing doing remote viewing, where the friend will bring you an object in a bag, and you have to describe what your friend has brought you, and then she'll show you what the thing is. And then you graduate, and she'll bring 3 bags, and then randomly choose one, because you don't want to teach yourself to read the mind of your friend. You don't want to teach yourself telepathy. You want to be able to find the parking space where nobody knows where the parking space is. So you want to learn through practice how to expand your awareness. And in my little book, The Reality of ESP, we show people how to do that. And in the film, Third Eye Spies, we show a couple of instances where I'm on camera interviewing people. I interview Hella Hammond in her first trial, where she's describing where Hal is hiding, which happens also to be at the pedestrian overpass. And you can see the kind of very sharp descriptions. She had never done anything like this before. And she described the squares within squares within squares, which is exactly what you see if you stand there looking at the wires. Not hard to do. And the way this intersects with modern physics is that psychic ability is really a non-local phenomena. The non-locality shows up with modern ideas of interconnectedness and ideas of modern quantum mechanics and non-locality. And the way it pertains here is that we know that it's no more difficult to describe what's going on 10,000 miles away in Soviet Russia than it is to describe across the street. So increasing the distance between you and your target does not make it harder to do or decrease the accuracy or interfere with the resolution or reliability. No harder to describe a weapon shop in Russia than the bowling alley in Palo Alto. And the thing that is most interesting to me is that it's similarly no harder to describe what's going to happen days or weeks in the future than it is contemporaneously. So we did a whole series of experiments where a person had to describe where are we going to take you tomorrow where that place is not even chosen yet. And that worked just as well. And many of us think it might have worked a little better. And the most common psychic experience that people have is a precognitive dream, where you go to sleep at night and have a unusually vivid, bizarre dream, and then that occurs the next day. And what you then, if you want to learn to do that, you then have to develop reliability, so that people have all sorts of weird dreams, most of which are not precognitive, most of which are wish fulfillment or dreams caused by the previous day's residue, or anxiety dreams. For example, if you have a dream that you're going to fail a test, you have a math test tomorrow and you dream you're going to fail that, and you haven't studied for the exam, that would not be precognition. That'd just be what you expect. But if you have a dream that is very bizarre or very strong, clear, bizarre, outside of your normal thought processes, you can assume that that might be precognition. So the game I play is that I don't get credit in the big book for precognition unless I tell my wife that I had a dream last night that I think is precognitive. Because otherwise, I can have a dream, a thing may happen or not happen. And in order to develop precognitive abilities so it's useful, you've got to develop the discernment to separate precognition from anxiety or wish fulfillment. So for example, if I wake up and my last dream would be that I dreamt that in my living room, there's an electric train running around the edge of the ceiling where the ceiling matches the walls. So I see this nice little mark line miniature train running in a circle around the room. I don't own any train like that. I haven't had any trains in the house for 50 years. There's no putative source. I haven't seen any trains. I don't want a train. I don't have any trains. So that would qualify well as a precognitive dream, in that it's bizarre, crystal clear, not a wish fulfillment dream, not an anxiety dream, not from my residue. It's the real McCoy. I told my wife about that. And now you probably want to know, where did the train come from? So I got my coffee, which is how I start my day. Then I come to my computer, and my homepage is the New York Times. So I turn on the computer, and on the front page of the New York Times is a picture story of reconstruction and repair of the elevated train in downtown Chicago, where I grew up. And the train in downtown Chicago is known as the Loop, because the elevated train runs in a circle around all the big buildings in downtown Chicago before it goes off to the south side and the north side. So what I had on my screen is an aerial picture of a circular electric train going around and round. So to parse that so that it makes sense, I would say my 8:30 experience of the electric train right in front of me was the cause of my 6:30 dream of an electric train. That I believe in a lot of weird stuff, but I do believe in causality. So if I have a dream about an electric train, that dream has to be caused by something. Now, a way to say that so that it makes sense is you could say that it was caused by my experience of that exact image 2 hours later. Buddhists would probably not accept that. They would say that's too different, that's too complicated. Buddhists would say time is simply an illusion. That is, there is no time for consciousness. There's no separation in consciousness. Everything in the universe is connected and is available to your awareness, and you locked onto this thing because it's meaningful for you. And of course, we don't know which of those are true.
Got it.
But
Where,
the idea of timeless awareness is locked into Dzogchen Buddhism. There's Longchenpa, Longchen Rabjan, who wrote in the 12th century. He really was the clarifier of the earlier writings. Longchen Rabjan wrote a book called The Basic Space of Phenomena. Sounds a lot like a physics book. And he describes that for consciousness, there is no time and there's no cause and effect. Consciousness is outside of ordinary causality, which is to say, and of course, physicists hate the idea. If you don't understand, for physicists, if you don't understand causality, you don't understand anything. But what Longchenpa says is that because there is no time for consciousness, there's no causality. So you can see limitless future and limitless distance because you're not limited by time or space. Because who you are, your very nature is timeless awareness, and that's probably not a surprise for you. But that's a principal teaching of Dzogchen is that your consciousness is unlimited. In fact, many years ago, before I was that conversant with Dzogchen, I wrote a book called Limitless Mind, where I sort of precognized what I was going to discover when I read the Dzogchen teaching. But probably for anybody who's been a meditator, the idea of limitless mind is not such a big stretch.
where do the experience of synchronicity and deja vu connect to this? Is there a connection in your mind?
Well, deja vu, I think, is just an error in consciousness. Deja vu is your idea that what you're seeing now greatly resembles something you've seen before, and you're confident you've never been there before. For example, if you walk into a hotel room or into what I was thinking of as a ballroom, you say, my God, looks so familiar. And it may look so familiar, but the property of deja vu that lets you understand that it's an illusion is that you can't really do anything with that. You walk into this ballroom and say, that looks so familiar, I've been here before. If somebody says, well, where's the men's room? You're not going to be able to know that. Because what you have is a erroneous picture. It's as though your eyes and your consciousness have a little time delay. You're getting to experience the place before you, in a way that makes you think you've seen it before.
Hmm.
That's, I know a lot of people are very attached to deja vu, but I think it's just an error. The reason I think it's an error is because you can't do anything with it. It's not helpful, not useful. Synchronicity is more interesting to me. That's also not understood, of course. But in synchronicity, you have an event that takes place and it's meaningful for you, but it's outside of time. That is, you may be talking to a friend about a piece of music that you. I was at Carnegie Hall and I saw a wonderful piece of music. Rostropovich was playing the cello. It was the first time he came. He was playing a Bach cantata on the cello. And the person said, gee, that's very interesting. I wish I could hear that. And I turned on the radio, and it just happens the music station in California is playing the Bach suite. Now, I had no idea that was there, I wasn't looking for it. It just happened to appear uncaused. So basically, synchronicity appears to be an uncaused event that takes place in our consciousness. We may learn a little bit. We may learn more about the space-time in which we live. I have some ideas about that. That is, you may not be separated from the things around you by as much as you think. That is, you may be living in a much more interconnected space-time where the answer is through the geometry of space-time rather than any kind of electromagnetic signal. So my whole thought process might have been stimulated by the fact that I was going to hear the sonata on the radio. So
I see.
Synchronicity is very interesting because that's not a fake event. Say a synchronistic event is an event whose causal nexus is unknown.
And yet one can tune their awareness and their intention to create more synchronicities, even though they may not be cognizant of what that synchronicity will be in the future.
That's right. My younger son was very good at having happy accidents. We were once walking down the Embarcadero in San Francisco, and he might have been 8 or 9 years old, and he suddenly took off across this busy array of streetcar tracks, and he came back with two $20 bills. And I said, well, what the hell? That was dangerous. Why did you run across the street? He said, well, I wanted to get the money before somebody else did. And what he found is obviously some kind of drug money. It was two 20s rolled up in a little cylinder about the size of a cigarette package. He obviously could not have seen it from 75 feet away across the traffic, but somehow he knew that was there. And he went to Germany when he was 12 years old. We sent him to visit his grandfather in Germany, and he wanted a camera. And we were thinking about getting him a camera. This is a while ago where a 35 millimeter camera would be expensive. And he just came home from the park with a good looking 35 millimeter Olympus camera. I said, well, where'd you get that? He said, well, it was in the park where I was playing ball with my friends. And like good citizens, we took it to the police station, and he said he's going to Germany in 2 weeks. He said, okay, give us your phone number. If somebody claims it, we know where it is, and no one claimed it. So he's very good at manifesting things out of nowhere. It's a kind of synchronicity. The things that he would like to have just manifest for him. And he's now an attorney.
When you're describing this process of remote viewing and precognition, and it's very visual in nature. That's just the primary sense perception is visual to get this information.
Visual sort of implies that it has something to do with your eyes. So I've done remote viewing with a blind person who does just fine. He's not blind. If you're blind from birth, then you're lacking the descriptor set. Excuse me, you're lacking the descriptor set to be able to describe three-dimensional space. So that would be hard to do. My vision is very poor, but I navigate ordinary space-time quite well. In fact, I used to ride a motorcycle. So, but but
What's a
it's not,
better way to put this?
it's
Maybe
not
it's geometry. It's so there is something that is well, it's not information is not necessarily coming to you in the form of sound or tactile ways. It's
it's
coming.
visual images.
Yes, that's what I was. What I was asking. So, but
So,
where I'm going with that is there is something in your book about EEG research and that you were studying the occipital lobe in this process.
well, I had the idea that um, if you flash lights at one person, then that might show up in the consciousness of another person. And that could either be a clairvoyant perception because they were aware that a light is flashing in a distant room, or it could be a connection telepathically between the two people. So I worked with my friend Hella, with whom I had quite a nice connection. She's very psychic and very empathetic. So I had the idea, and I'm very photophobic. I'm very sensitive to flashing lights. So we set up a situation with a battery operated light flasher in a distant room, and Hella was in the electrically shielded room connected to the brainwave machine. And what we found is during the time that I was experiencing the nasty light flash, she would be knocked out of alpha. And we did that at SRI, and we also did it at Langley Porter Neuropsychiatric Institute for the Navy, because they wanted to communicate psychically with people in a submarine. So you can, now she was not able to guess when the light flash was coming. So her guessing was a chance, but her brain waves knew that she was experiencing a light flash. But all of this is in terms of visual experience. That is, tell me what you're seeing. Tell me about your experience. What are the shapes? What are the colors? So forth. It's all this very high bandwidth visual channel, and does not work so well with sounds.
What else can you share about what you found going on in the brain during remote viewing and during telepathy, clairvoyance?
We were not able to find changes in the brain. Now, in Europe, they have done MRI, functional MRI experiments, and they find that when a person is successfully remote viewing a target, then you have a change in the brainwave functioning. And I've seen those films, and I can't remember. I'm not a neurophysiologist, so although it was clear at the time that one part of I could make up and say the occipital portion would light up, but I'm not actually sure that that's true. I saw this quite a few years ago in Europe. But the idea, what you're asking makes sense. That if you're doing a functional MRI and the person has a actual cognition of something that's happening, then you would expect that to show up as though they were looking at it. For example, in the MRI machine, you're not showing any lights, but if they showed you pictures, and it's true that is, when they do show you pictures, you have changes in your brain waves, and when they show you scary pictures, you have different pictures in your brain waves. So you can tell with functional MRI that a person is having an experience. Now it's and of course I'm making this all up, but because in trying to answer your question. But
Okay.
what I would say is the fMRI shows shows that you are experiencing a veridical image. and that can be brought to you by ESP, or a picture on a monitor in the tube with you. So if you see a veridical image, either psychically or with your eyes, that shows up someplace in your brain. It does not show up if you're just thinking of something. Now, one of the things that crossed my mind is that what's unique in my film, that as people have seen pictures of remote viewing in my books, and you've shown them some pictures of remote viewing. In the film, we have our two CIA contract monitors, a physician and a physicist, who were responsible for making sure that we didn't deceive ourselves or nobody fooled us. So we had two on-the-spot contract monitors from the CIA, and because they've both retired now, and I got that released under Freedom of Information, we could have these two guys on camera looking into the camera and say, yes, I was there when Russ and Hal did these experiments. They really happened. People did look into the distance and find the submarine and find the airplane and find the hostages. We were there, and that really happened. We don't know how it happened, but somehow, as they say, those guys in California had some way of getting information. And then they hired Pat Price away from us. They became concerned that Price was this omniscient gem who could see into the distance and read things in the filing cabinet. So it's a little bit like you've got Superman on the loose who could read the launch codes for the nuclear missiles. We've got to take him away from these enthusiastic ESP researchers in California and park him next to the CIA building in Virginia so they could work with him side by side. And they did that for a number of months, and he then died mysteriously. So the CIA was happy to work with Price, but he sort of scared them, because CIA is all about secrecy. And if somebody is omniscient, if he can look into your office, read your files, and you're in the CIA, and your whole life is about preventing people from reading your files, then even though Price was really great, could penetrate the Libyan embassy and go into the code room and describe what's going on there, as he did, and Ken Kress describes in the film in a formal experiment where Pat Price was given the mission to penetrate the embassy, and he was able to do that successfully. They were happy he could do that successfully, but it scared the hell out of them.
Yeah, I would imagine. They're in this process of discerning what type of information you're getting, what kind of imagery, whether it be from someone else's mind or from a distance or from future time, for lack of a better word. Is it simply your intention on that you're setting once you get quiet, or is there another step there in the methodology?
I think intention is a good word for it. For example, if you've got something on your table, if you say to me, what have I got on my table? What's the interesting object? And of course, on the screen, I just see you. So I close my eyes and I say, well, I close my eyes and say, what shows up that's surprising? And I see something that looks like a little paperweight or a hockey puck, some flat cylindrical thing pops into my vision. And I think that has some quality, because what I expect to see is some wires and a video monitor and some other stuff, but this little flat cylinder is more interesting to me. So that it does not require deep meditation, and there may be no such thing on your desk, but that's the way. that's how easy this would normally be.
I see. Okay.
And as I continue, I realize that I'm looking exactly at your earphones. So I'm looking exactly at a flat cylinder. So we may have some interference, some analytical overlay, because I have in front of me exactly a flat cylinder, and you've got to be discerning. You try and have somebody isolated from a stimulating environment. We have a pretty gray, comfortable room with nothing happening, and we're familiar with what's in the room. So if somebody pops up with an electric train, we know there's no electric train in that room.
Right.
But
Wow.
it's not hard to do.
Okay. Wow. So
what I'd leave you with is that psychic abilities are a normal activity. You don't have to pay anybody thousands of dollars to learn to get in touch with your psychic ability. Your nature is timeless awareness. And I encourage you to see the movie when it comes out, Third Eye Spies. And if you're interested in learning to do remote viewing, I have a chapter in my book, Reality of ESP, that tells you how to work with. I can't tell you how to find a friend, but if you have a friend, you and your friend could work together to develop mutually your psychic abilities.
Russell, thank you so much. Good luck with the film coming out, and we'll put these links in the show notes.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to chat with you.